The subject for today's discussion is role of institutions in developing scholars in Hindu studies. Now, before I start, some rules of the game. I shouldn't take more than 12 to 15 minutes. I'm going to 15 minutes, but I will try to keep myself within that. And we have 4 distinguished speakers. For them also I have got 15 minutes each. And one bad thing, there are several bad things about me, is that I'm very strict about time, you know. So, in the 12th minute I will give you a light, decent, gentle reminder that time is up. So that we have left it 15 to 20 minutes for discussion. This is basic rules again. You're very prepared, very good. Yes, that's fine. So I start now. The subject is developing scholars in Hindu studies. Think of it. Developing scholarship itself is a very onerous responsibility, not so easy. And then a particular branch of that, Hindu studies. Now, you come from all over the world, so you know what kind of religious studies are imparted there. I come from Bharat. We have a very different history. And much of our academic curriculum, especially anything to do with Hindu studies, has a very problematic situation there, you know. Now, keeping in mind the very distinguished panel of speakers and very learned audience, and you are going to speak on themes which are very, very relevant. So I thought I better not touch the things which you are going to talk about, you know. Basically, I have been a student of history. So I will talk about the history part of it, the evolution, the historical evolution of academics, historical studies, and how that is related, how that fits into India's political culture. Because education and politics have been very, very closely mixed up for so many years, certainly more since in the last 50, 60 years or so. So the nitty-gritty of the problem, the academic content, the religious, the Hindu studies, I leave it to the speakers. I'll talk on something else, but something relevant probably. Now, I will begin with a story. We are trained as, you know, story gatherers, storytellers, historians. But as historians, students of history, we are supposed to go by facts, not by emotion, not by sentiment, not by this and that consideration. So the story is, say, from a book, 11-page article in a book written by Paramhans Yoganand. I'm surely, probably most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with this book. And here, this 11-page article is titled India's Great Scientist Sir Jagdish Chandra Bose. I think again all of you know about him. Why I give this example? Because this is in a book written by one of India's greatest saints, the iconic figure, and he is writing about a scientist, one of the first generation of India's great scientists before C.V. Raman's age. What does he write? He said, once he had a conversation with Sir Jagdish. Then Sir Jagdish told him that he was educated at Cambridge. And what does he say? How admirable is the Western method of submitting all theory to scrupulous experimental verification. That empirical procedure has gone hand in hand with a gift for introspection, that is by Eastern heritage together. They have enabled me to sunder the silences of natural realms long uncommunicative. I don't comment anything except half a question, half-line question. Suppose what happens, how would the intelligentsia, quote unquote, the academia, quote unquote, would react if some scientist or even some social scientist talks about this? You will see the howl of rage, the protest. Now, I'll give certain examples and then try to convey the main point. Immediately before independence, this should be about 1949-50, Sri Aurobindo gave a message at the University of Chandrika. What does he say? There is a question whether she, meaning India, may prosper more harmlessly in the outward life, yet lose altogether her richly masked and firmly held spiritual experience and knowledge. It would be tragic irony of fate if India were to throw away her spiritual heritage at the very moment when in the rest of the world there is more and more turning towards a spiritual help and a saving light. This must not and surely not happen, but it cannot be said that danger is not there. A vast and inner and outer progress is needed if you are to fulfill India's true destiny. So everyone, every iconic figure, they are stressing the importance of the spiritual, the religious aspect and how it needs to be tagged, how it should combine with modern science. Long before that, almost 60-70 years before that, Swami Vivekananda had said, we have been slaves forever. It's very important. It has never been given to the masses of India to express the inner light which is their inheritance. The Occident has been rapidly advancing towards freedom for the last few centuries. Again, he says something very important. Can that be called society which is formed by the aggregate of men who are lumps of clay, like lifeless machines, like heaped up pebbles? Can such a society fare well? So the point is that some of the makers of modern India, they are very much conscious of what constitutes the basics of modern education, which helps nation building, which lays the foundations of a constructive society which wants to move forward. Now I come back to some professional historians. Altekar, another very big name, A.S. Altekar, who wrote one of the very finest books on India's ancient educational system, also Indian polity. He explained body, mind, intellect and spirit constitute a human being. The aims and ideals of ancient Indians' education were to promote their simultaneous and harmonious development. Men as social beings, ancient Indian education not only emphasized social duties but also promoted social happiness. And this being the basics, the foundations of Indian education that sustained our society for several centuries. And then how it stopped. Now why it stopped? Again, that is a question. If you ask too many questions, then again some people would not like this. Certainly not here, but outside. So in this context, now again he said, another scholar, Mukherji, education was treated as a matter of growth, a process of life which was controlled in its capacity. So again I emphasize that everyone, right from our saintly figures, the philosophers, the historians before independence, they knew how important religious studies was in the making of a nation. Of course, ancient history, all of you know how we had Takshashila, Nalanda, Vikramshila and all that, and how it all perished. The question we need to ask is, now this is a diversion. I'm diverting a bit. Was if Indian education system, Hindu society, is everything so much hunky-dory about it, so much good about it, how does one explain repeated invasions, subjugation, centuries of slavery? And how does one explain this mind-boggling tendency for self-flagellation? Easily accept defeat and submit so easily to humiliation. You see, 2000, I come back to contemporary times. You're talking of Hindu studies. But first, do we have really empirically sound history which has given a correct position, knowledge about the Hindus? No, not yet. We are so scared, we are so afraid of doing that. So you are talking of Hindu studies. But before that, by Hindu को अपना इतिहास जानने का अधिकार है. What is the real story of Hindus? Who is going to do that? I come into modern politics. I can't escape. I didn't want to do it, but to explain this, I have to bring up this issue. 2004, when this NDA government lost, Atalji's government lost, the new government came. Arjun Singh was the education minister, and he had been campaigning that the NDA government, Hindu communalists, Hindu fascists had given these books. Some new books had come, NCERT. So he had set up a committee in 2004 for the Arjun Singh committee. This committee gave a report in 5-6 months time. 2005 they gave us school textbooks. Unfortunately, those textbooks are still there on this. Yeah. So this is one thing, basic problem you see. So if you can't give proper history books which depicts the story of Hindus, the plight of the Hindus, achievement of Hindus, whether ancient times, medieval time, modern time, how can we have Hindu studies all of it? Certain, yes, I am keeping the time in mind. So, look, I will not take much time. I will not take misuse the opportunity given to me. So, you see, there are various problems, and as a Conrad is here, and Conrad is not an Indian, but he has done more than any Indian to rectify the wrong history that has been taught to our students, So we in India have been fighting, complaining, petitioning that we should have proper, sound, balanced textbooks, but nothing has happened so far. But we expect probably things will change, Now there are various things, where our students are taught. Alien invasion theory, the aliens came from outside. The Sufis were great spiritual masters. India won its independence because of non-violent means. All kinds of things, these are there. If I ever circulate, you get to know. But now these are not the real matters in history. These are all false propaganda. Because of various scholars, because of access to social media, because of internet, now people get to know the real thing which happened But then we are talking of Hindu studies. Now how do you study? You study it in school, but the syllabus is framed by NCERT. India it is NCERT. I know what a wonderful fight you had in the California textbooks. But our NCERT is not prepared to change the history textbooks, basic facts. Aurangzeb was a tyrant or not? Tipu Sultan was a nationalist or a fanatic? They are still not reopened the issues. Suddenly you want that you should be talking about glory of Hindu Dharma. How impossible. So let's talk about practicability. Aligarh University, which is totally funded by central government, they have departments like what? Conrad, the Center for Quranic Studies, funded, professor, reader, salaried staff, pension, everything. Center for Islamic Studies, Center for Shia Theology, Center for Sunni Theology. Nothing like this is there in BHU or any university in India. Yet this is funded by your tax, my tax. You can't do anything about that. So Islamic studies is going on. Sunni theology is 0 minute. Yes, I have almost come to an end now. So these are some of the basic facts. I'll just take 1 more minute. I have not actually crossed even 20 minutes, please. I started 4:22. No, I have started 4:22. Something wrong. But let's take 1 more minute. Now, one term, the pejorative term which is used, Macaulay destroyed India's education system. So those who studied English language, say my father's generation, my grandfather's generation, they are called Macaulay Putra. We are also Macaulay Putras, you know. And one reason, if Indians are doing, Indian diaspora is doing so well, because you got the opportunity to learn English language. If English had not come, I'm a great nationalist. People say I'm a Hindu fanatic. I don't like, but yet, if we had not learned English language, we will be just like Afghanistan and Pakistan, you know. Mind that. And it is same English language which produced whom? Savarkar produced, Subhash Chandra Bose, Sardar Patel were produced. They came out of the system, you know. Indians those days, those who want to study England, they all came back. Now Indians who leave India, they don't want to come back. 3 of my own nephews are studying and teaching in America. They all went to IITs, they all came. I said, why don't you come? बोले मामा क्या करेंगे वो बताओ, आप लाभ देखिए क्या है. So look, so let's be more rational. English language has done us some good, you know. It's our own fault. We don't teach our children to learn mother tongue, you know. Fine. With these few words, I conclude. And now I will request the distinguished panelists to speak one by one. I will call you now. Now I will request Swami Mitrananda ji, very well-known intellectual, and he is attached to Chinmaya Vishwa Bharat. He is a direct disciple of Gurudev Swami Chinmaya ji. He is a senior monk of Chinmaya Mission, Chennai. He is a trustee of Chinmaya University and a national advisor of all Bharat Chinmaya Yuva Kendra. Swami has trained more than 600 youngsters across the world to serve Bharat for a year through Youth Empowerment Program. He is a publisher of Chinmaya Udghosh, his international youth magazine, and has authored few books. He has travelled across 35 countries to impart teachings of Hindu Dharma. His innovative and logical interpretation of ancient Hindu philosophy have made him very popular in all groups, age groups.
Thank you.
Ab time dekh rahe hain? Maine
Sit straight. Don't sleep. I'm telling myself. I would start with half a sentence and you need to complete the other half. Jack and Jill, Humpty Dumpty, Patram Pushpam. Oh, thank you. That was few. Oh, others were listening. Okay. Ananyas Chintayan Tamam. Okay, good. You know why I asked you that is if we do not have our own scholars in Hindu culture, we will end up knowing more things which are not relevant to us and learn things which are not relevant to us and forget things which are relevant to us. We must have our own scholars. That is very, very important. So my presentation is, what is the cost if we don't have our own scholars? What will happen to us? That is what we will do. Yeah, somebody else can do it. Thank you. If we do not have our own scholars, what will happen to us is authentic information gets compromised through wrong interpretations. Very genuine, original, authentic information is mostly compromised by wrong interpretations. And we have lived in Bharat that way. For example, most of us know about the people, as our professor just said, who conquered us. Probably we are all well aware of history revolving around Delhi, which could be more of invaders coming. Probably we may not know much about Lalitaditya or Rajendra Chola. The coastal part of India, maybe we are not aware of the history. So what happens when we don't have our own scholars? The information what we get itself gets very, very minimum and most of the time misinterpreted. So we have big misinterpretations when it comes to Hindu science. When I was in the university and even when I started taking classes for the youth, many a times in most of the universities, colleges, when we used to ask youngsters, name few scientists. First name would be Edison, Einstein, Newton. Indian students would not know Indian scientists. Then we need to ask, and then they would come up with few names. Bhaskaracharya, Aryabhatta. What did they discover? Or what did they offer? What is their thing? Not much informed. So what happens when we don't have our own scholars? Our content would never come to the forefront. What someone else wants you to learn, that alone would get it. So this is why we did not understand Hindu science. We are one of the most scientific dharma we have. Hindu dharma, when you say Hinduism, is a very, very scientific culture, scientific religion. It is a science which can evolve even a human to divine. And we are the first to understand the world. We measured the skies. We knew about the stars. We know about the distance. But we Indians, since we did not have our own scholars, we did not know about it. We grew up not knowing about us. Hindu science, we hardly know. Indian history, what little we know is really, the history which many people who came to India and invaded, but about Indian kings we won't know. How did Rajendra Chola move from coastal Tamil Nadu to central Java? How many ships did he take? We won't know. When did he do this? We won't know. What was the army he had, or what are the lands he conquered? How well he established commerce center in central Java? We won't know. So when we grow up like this, not knowing, then we end up in feeling inferior, because what was told to us is we have been conquered and conquered and conquered. As a result, we grow up without self-pride. What do we know when we don't have nothing? We do not know about our past and we are not proud about it. What do? We stand up. We ape the West. We imitate the West. Or people who have influenced us. And as a result, we end up not knowing anything. That is dangerous. The danger in which the culture degraded is only because we did not create our own scholars. We had ones in the recent times, particularly after Bharat becoming independent, we should have focused on this. I remember we opened an academy to train people into civil service. Chinmaya Academy for Civil Service. We did this in Chennai. On the inauguration, we invited Dr. Kiran Bedi ji to be there, and she looked at us and she said, "Good that you people have taken this up, but please understand we are 50 years behind. We are 50 years late on training people who could become civil servants." Similarly, not creating our own people, that is where we lost complete pride. We missed out on science, we missed out on history. And then when you see, we missed out on, like our itihasas always interpreted as mythology. Itihasa is not mythology, itihasa is history. When Ramayana is told history, Puranas, itihasa, when we say it is itihasa, it is history, but we are taught mythology. In mythology, there is an element of doubt a person gets, thinking, is it true or is it imagination? So this is very, very important. When we don't have, our books will get wrongly interpreted, Hindu Ityasas becomes mythology. That means the historical value of Ram becomes an imaginary value. That doesn't work. So we have to keep this in mind. When we do not have, this is what happens. And it is really sad, like when most of us in Bharat, when we grew up, we were told the British came and educated us. This is told. I have grown up listening to it, that the British came and educated us. We had Takshashila, we had Vallabha, we had Vikramashila, we had Kanchi, we had Nalanda, universities 2000 years ago. And yet we were told that the British came, the colonial people came and educated us. We lost it. You understand, when we don't have. And this particular aspect, Bharat's commerce through international sea trade, is another subject we need more scholars to look into. The reason is, the 11th century, in the 11th century, India's GDP was 32% of the globe. 11th century. The invasions had not begun. 12th century, the invasions started one after another. Our GDP came down to 25%. 1 year. We somehow survived till 18th century, maintaining it at 23, 24, around that. In fact, there is a record where in the 18th century, for a brief movement of 2-3 months, India went more than China in the GDP. So basically it was India and China had more than 50% of the world's GDP. Very few Indians know about it till 18th century. Now comes the point. Ancient sea trade is important because the GDP of the nation was kept through the sea trade, and we traveled across the globe. Most of the rivers in India had ports. A river had a port, and through the river you come to the sea, and then you cross the high seas and you go. And yet, if you study in Bharat, particularly in an English medium school, a convent, etc., you will learn Vasco da Gama found sea route to India. When? 15th century. When was Rajendra Chola? 1000 years ago. Wrong interpretations come in, our values are taken away, we are made to feel we are nobody, we grow up learning more about others and others' glory, and at the same time we were made to feel we are nobody, ashamed, unscientific, we need to be cultured, educated, civilized. This is the opinion created, and it went very deep into our psyche. If we don't have our own scholars, this is what where we would end up to. Like, I would like to bring out something which we, for a very long time, we thought he was a noble man. And we admired him. And even today in Bharat, we have roads on his name. Next slide. Go ahead, next. Went back actually. Statements of Max Muller, belittling the Vedas. In his lecture on the Vedas, he expresses the following opinion of the hymns. The historical importance of the Veda can hardly be exaggerated, but it is intrinsic merit, and particularly the beauty or the elevation of its sentiments, have by being rated far too high. You have given too much importance to it, it is not that great. Large number of the Vedic hymns are childish in its extreme, tedious, low, commonplace. Now this is Max Muller. And we thought he was a great friend of ours. We did not know, so someone has to say that. When someone speaks a little bit about what we have, we feel very nice, and particularly a non-Indian talking about it, we rated him very, very high, and that was wrong. I'll tell you what my master Swami Chinmaya has to say about this in 1950. Next slide. We read our own Vedas through the translation by the German scholars who had been paid for translating these works by the arch enemies of our culture. Max Muller, whom we have learned to adore, is the greatest sinner in this particular conspiracy of indirectly ruining our respect for our culture. This he said in 1950s, and this is the note what I have taken is from his commentary on Gita chapter 10 verse 21. When he was talking about it, he has written, and in his book it is there. This is what Gurudev Swami Chinmaya felt, how Max Muller has damaged us. Well, if we don't have our own scholars, we would end up feeling inferior, we will end up not knowing anything about us. And if we don't cultivate them now, sooner or later, Hindu culture, Hindu strength should be diminished. Academically, we need scholars who will take up this Hindu challenge. In this regard, we have made an attempt. A couple of months ago, we had a couple of meetings where Swami Vidyapeeth was there with us, Dattaji was there. We sat and we started working on creating academicians. How did we do this? Our aim was already in some of the well-known Hindu global organizations, people who have done PhDs, who are academicians of different fields, doesn't matter. We will gather them together, start orienting them. We have decided to create new people, but then let us start orienting already existing PhD scholars to start looking into this kind of a content. Thank you.
Profusely, is after a long time, if I'm sharing a session, I found the speaker completing his speech without being interrupted. So this is a great achievement. But we're so thankful to you for pointing out the main fault lines our education system and the process what this generation is missing out. Now we are familiar with the fault lines, problems, and the task is how to fill up the gap, how to make up for the losses our people have suffered over the years. Please don't thank you once again. I will now request Dr. Bush, Michael Bush, International Administrator. Sorry, I don't have to.
I'm here by default. My colleague got the flu at the last minute. So frantically this morning I was told what my topic was. If the logic is not quite 100%, you'll know why. I am honored to be here with wonderful spiritual luminaries and scholars and such accomplished and divine people. And what I'm going to say to you, you already know. Mostly, you'll know it better than I will be able to express it. But I think the main point that I'm going to make today is that we live in a modern time. And that, as Swamiji was saying, Hindu Dharma is a scientific knowledge. And the importance of teaching this and evaluating it in terms of science cannot be, I think, overemphasized, because it will lead to tremendous adoption of Vedic science and Vedic technology globally for all of humanity, not just Hindus. Veda, as you know, means knowledge, and it is total knowledge of all the laws of nature. I meant to start my talk by thanking the greatest scientists that have ever walked the earth, and they come from Bharat. They are the great rishis of India, who saw the entirety of the laws of nature, and they didn't see it as in some objective way. They saw it in their own Brahmachari, in their own consciousness. And they fully understood how to utilize those knowledge to create happiness, peace, and bliss, and freedom for everyone on earth. So it's a complete science of life. It's not based on partial knowledge. Modern education concentrates mostly on what is known. It completely ignores the knower and the process of knowing. And these three elements together make total knowledge. If we want to look at the tip of the iceberg, we could say, is modern science. And I think we're on the verge, I should say, of tremendous time in humanity, where science is coming to the door of Vedic science. And all these nanotechnologies and all of these biotech breakthroughs and everything, their tremendous time of awakening is coming in natural law. But the knowledge of it being partial, little knowledge, is a dangerous thing. Manusmriti says, Veda kila dharma moolam. Veda is the root of all law. Modern physics describes this in a different way. It says that as you progressively get to finer time and distance scales, you get more energy, more power, more completeness, and more totality. And the unified field of all the laws of nature, the description of it is that it's infinite, that it's unbounded in space and time, that it's the home of all the laws of nature. It sounds a lot like the description of the Vedic scientists of what Atma was. And in fact, when you think about what are laws of nature, this looks a little bit like ginger ale, but it's superstring. We'll just call it a picture of the superstring theory, because modern physics tells us that everything is vibration, that the laws of nature are just vibrations. And what, after all, were the Vedas? They were vibratory expressions of their true reality. And the impact of the experience of this reality is measurable. It's scientific. And what yoga and the technologies of yoga taught was how to experience this unified field of all the laws of nature in the Atma of everyone. So thoroughly modern education, for it to be modern, for it to be scientific, for it to include the knower and the process of knowing, has to include Atma. It has to. And the government of India has recognized this. They're prescribing now that all the schools in India have to take up yoga and meditation. And it's not just happening in India, it's happening globally. If we want to know Veda, we have to be Veda, because Veda can only be known on its own terms. If you go to a marketplace and you don't understand the language of the banana seller or the mango seller or whatever, you can't say to them, I want a mango. You have to know that language to get the effect that you want. And Veda is its own language on its own term, and it's known by itself. So this is the main point that I wanted to make today, and then I'm going to show some examples. To be relevant and useful and universal, Veda must be understood in terms of the most advanced theories of modern science. And there is a lot of work, excellent work that's been done in physics, chemistry, biology, to just do just that. And Vedic science and its technologies must be evaluated by modern science. They have to be. If I said to you today, how many Brahmins are in America, and you stop and think, what are those Brahmins doing? There's maybe 200,000-300,000, I don't know what the number is. But how many of them are in the temples chanting and doing the yajnas and the pujas? They're doctors, they're engineers, they're researchers. So if we want Veda to come in the language of our times, it has to be evaluated in terms of science. Now there's ways of verification that are open to us, and I would like to suggest 3 that make sense to me. First, you have the ancient record of the Veda, which itself is eternal, aparashaya, uncreated. You have the applied technologies which are in Vedic science, and which give the actual direct experience of Veda. And those can be measured in terms of their benefits to human life. Because the Veda without experience is not very useful. There's a verse from Rig Veda, Riksho Akshare Parame Vyomin Yasmin Deva Adi Vishve Nishedu Yastana Vedikam Vriksha Karashaki Ya Itad Vadusti Me Samasate. I may have butchered that, I apologize if I did. But the point is that the Vedas exist in para, the immortal transcendental field. And if your awareness is not stationed there, what can the Veda do for you? You can't activate those laws of nature. The great seers of India could do anything. They could know anything. They could accomplish anything. The Itihasa is full of the stories, the greatness of the Siddhas and the power. The Ramayana, as Swamiji was saying, is not some mythology, it's the truth. It's what human life is supposed to be. So let's take an example, just one concrete example. Shivam Shantam Advaitam Chaturyam Manyate Sa'atma Savigyeha. There's 4 state of consciousness. It says it very clearly in the Upanishads. There's something that's beyond being awake, dreaming, and sleeping. It turns out that medical science has already shown that that's exactly what happens in the state of samadhi. You experience something beyond waking, dreaming, and sleeping. It's scientifically measurable. The brain becomes coherent, highly coherent, massive coherence in the frontal lobes of the brain. The body gets more profound rest and sleep, suspension of respiration. All the stress hormones go away. Chandrika gave a beautiful talk today about experiencing stress in her highly successful career and how her spiritual path had taken her to realize that there was something more. But here we find that stress, which is the greatest killer in modern society, there's an anecdote. The anecdote is in the 4th state of consciousness. There are hundreds of scientific studies on the effect of Vedic technologies that have been published in the leading scientific journals. So what does the brain look like for a person who's in samadhi, who's experiencing the 4th state? It doesn't look like that. That's what an ordinary brain looks like. But if you want to look at a brain in samadhi, that's what it looks like. It's directly measurable. You can see when a person is transcending and experiencing ananda. So in the beginning, a person experiences it a little bit, but over time, it gets very strong. And the value of this, as you can see, it gets stronger and stronger with a little bit of practice, a little bit of experience. Here is a young man, his name is Elijah. He's here in Chicago. He's one of 1,000 students in the Chicago Public Schools who is participating in the University of Chicago's multi-million-dollar experiment to see if Vedic technology can transform the educational process, violent, disruptive education which is rampant, not just in America, but you find it quite often globally. And the results, if I have a video, I'm not going to show it because I'll run out of time, but if you're interested, I'll give you my card and I'll send you a link. It's absolutely the most incredible thing to hear the transformation of these students. But my point is, it doesn't matter if you're a student in the inner city schools of Chicago. And you can look at these young men in the background, how happy they look and how blissful they look. It doesn't matter if you're in an inner city in Chicago or if you're in Bhumi Bharat. The experience of samadhi is scientifically verifiable, and it is the same. There's a hot new topic in neuroscience. It's called the default mode network. It turns out that when the brain gets its aha moments, when it processes big problems and conceptual intuitions, when it sees the big picture, the default mode network is very highly active. And actually, in most meditation techniques, reduce the default mode network, but I won't go into that right now. But I want to show you, I don't know if I can do this or if you'll have to push it from the back. But I want to show you, these are students in India in a traditional Gurukul. They've all learned Bhavati Dhyan. And is there sound? Enough sound? I'm going to go very quick. He's doing it from the back. Yeah. Is there volume? If there's not volume, they're chanting after practicing meditation, and they learn to chant from that quiet level of Atma. And what you see is someone whose brain is being measured. It's actually their acharya. And you'll see on the wall what happens to the brain when you listen to Vedic chanting. And what you see there is frontal alpha coherence, EEG power. It's remarkable. In world-class athletes, you don't get that kind of a brain. In world-class CEOs, you don't get that kind of a brain. You get alpha coherence, you get alpha power. But this is remarkable, what happens, just from listening to Vedic chanting. Go to the next slide. So another example from the Vedic tradition, I have 2 minutes, I'm going to really fly here. Yogastha Kudakramani established Krishna's advice on the battlefield to Arjuna: get yourself established in being before you act. And how do you measure that scientifically? Well, if someone's been practicing meditation, afterwards, it's kind of like a gulab jamun, you soak it in the sugar sauce and it comes out, and it has some of that sweetness. So if you keep doing this, the mind stays coherent when you're active. That's the point. Yogastha Kudakramani. So you'll see that alpha coherence in long-term practitioners of transcendental meditation has that effect. It doesn't even take that long. It takes a couple of months for you to see the coherence with the eyes open. You'll see that the frontal brain coherence stays even when you're active. There is a living proof that the Vedas are teaching the most fundamental and powerful reality. The advice is practical, that it's useful. And having all of this integration of the brain is an amazing thing to have, because it's found in the highest level of world-class managers, in the highest level of musicians, and the top performers in the world. So I want to talk just 1 more minute about another application outside. There are millions of kids practicing Vedic technologies in the world now. They are in San Francisco, they are in New York City, they are in Mexico, they are in Africa, they are in India. This thing is taking off. It's a great tribute to the power of Hindu Dharma, Vedic knowledge and Vedic technology. In terms of medicine, if you apply unified, the entire physiology can be mapped scientifically in terms of the Veda and Vedic literature. It has been done. And if you apply the technologies, you get 75% less strokes. I know for Southeast Asians, stroke is a very important consideration. This is something that the American Medical Association now prescribes this. Now, wants people to start this if they have any risk for heart disease. There's also over an 11-year study with 2,000 people, 75% less illness if you apply Vedic medicine, Vedic technologies, unified field-based technologies. So, just in conclusion, I wanted to say these are trillion-dollar problems. PTSD in the military is a multi-trillion-dollar problem. The United States is now doing a multi-million-dollar phase 3 trial. This is why institutions and empirical research is so important. They're doing a phase 3 for 5,000 soldiers, and it's based on previous studies that have been done. And what it shows is that probably more than any other methodology, twice as effective is to give a person the experience of samadhi. It shrinks the amygdala in the brain, it lets the brain function normally, and soldiers who come home and commit suicide and do all these crazy things, they completely have their lives transformed. So there's a group effects of students practicing this. I won't go into those. But I wanted to just say that the importance of empirical research, the importance of putting Veda in terms of science, which is what it is, it's completely a scientific knowledge, is going to be, I think, the future for Hindu science and Hindu Dharma. And I want to thank all of the speakers that I'm with today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bush, for surveying so brilliantly from Veda to modern science. The final comment that how little knowledge is a dangerous thing. Sorry, I don't have much of time, and we have very two distinguished speakers to accommodate. So I will now call Brahmachari Dinesh Kashikar ji. Sri Dinesh Kashikar ji did graduation in Masters in Chemical Engineering from IIT Mumbai. He was introduced to the art of living in the year 1995 and became a full-time volunteer to the organization. He then became a teacher of the Art of Living Stresses Elimination Program. He has travelled with His Holiness Sri Sri Ravi Shankar across Bharat conducting yoga sessions. His responsibilities in the art of living have been diverse. In his capacity as a member of the Board of Academic Studies for the Department of Yoga at Sri Sri University, he has designed the syllabus and structure for the graduate and undergraduate programs currently of the university. Now, Dinesh.
Om Namah Pranavarthaya Shuddha Jnanakamurtaye Nirmalaya Prashantaya Dakshinamurtaye. For me, this is a very nice space to talk about something that's so dear to my heart. The previous speakers have pointed out very beautifully about Hindu study, and when I looked at the schedule that was put up, I think what really Hindu studies needs is to remove those inverted commas around Hindu studies. By making Hindu studies mainstream, by not saying, oh, Hindu studies, and putting inverted commas, that's how we can make Hindu studies happen. For this to happen, we need institutions, and like it was pointed out, there are chairs for so many other things. We need a proper plan to make sure that scholarship in Hindu studies gets appreciated, has a value, and in very crude terms has market value. You can make a living out of it. You can sustain your life with it. When will all this happen? When you and me can support such activities. And for this, we need a plan right from primary education, secondary education, to college, to scholarship, to research. If the whole gamut of Hindu studies spans the whole gamut of education, then we can have a sustainable structure to maintain it. Otherwise, we have pockets of Hindu studies, lots of brilliance, but no mainstream. It stays in inverted commas. At the shloka that I started with talks about the Guru Tattva, from where all knowledge comes. Traditionally, the Hindu or the Vedic tradition, like Dr. was referring to, talks about the importance of studying with the Guru. No study can happen without a Guru. Making studies dry is not the way. At the same time, all study involves both the head and the heart. There's intellect and the heart involved. A passion for studies can create an impact, and without an intellectual understanding, it's not able to propagate. So having both these things is very essential. Just like having the lights on allows the camera to record properly. In the same way, we need to turn the lights on in Hindu studies. And unless we do this, it's not going to work. And I'm so glad it's working now. I see today the world moving towards the essence of what is Hindu studies. Yoga, meditation, which used to mean someone sitting on a bed of nails, today has become mainstream. A person in a tie and coat would be teaching and learning meditation. And I think this is something wonderful that's already happening. We need to recognize this and create the framework, like Swamiji was saying. We need to have scholarship. At Sri Sri University, where I am a part of the board of studies for yoga, we are coming up with a chair for Bharat studies, for Vedic studies. We are seeing how we can make this happen. And I believe that if more institutions can participate, like Swamiji was saying, that we come together and create more chairs, create more opportunities. And the best part is, it's not just studies for the sake of studies. There is so much tangible output. There is so much research. There is a very, very practical application. And I think it's a very sustainable way of doing research, because unless research comes up with some kind of dividends, it's not going to stay for the long term. It might be tenuous. Research in physics does show results, but it's a little tenuous and then it stays. But research in something which has applications, there's much more funding for that. Today, we need to appreciate that Hindu studies is worth funding, is worth supporting. What can me and you do? Most of us sitting in this room either already have a job, do something, have a focus in life, and are also interested in Hindu studies. There are a few of us here whose primary aim is Hindu studies. If there could be more such people in today's world, and if all of us could support such things happening, that I feel is the way moving forward. I myself did a master's in chemical engineering, and then I met my Guru, His Holiness Shri Shri Ravi Shankar. It inspired me to say, well, there is more to life than what I thought it was. And it was this inspiration that brought me here, and made me able to stand on this stage and talk about the lights going on and off. So for me, without a spiritual basis, it's very difficult to keep up the scholarship on it. Our Gurukuls talked about transferring knowledge through what I call osmosis. It was not a student coming to the college and going back, but staying with the Guru and imbibing the knowledge. There is a very famous story in the Upanishads which talks about how the Guru sends the student with some cows to the forest and says, come back when there are 1,000. The student does not say, hey, how will this increase my scholarship? This is completely illogical. I came here to learn and you're telling me to take some cows. Yet, neither does the student question the Guru, and by doing that, he actually gains the knowledge, comes back with 1,000 cows. The story is very beautiful and it has another layer of meaning. It says, Go, the root dhatu go, stands for Gyan, Gaman, Prapti, Moksha. And often, the root of the cow is used as a symbol of knowledge and not as well. Having a few sutras and developing them, that's the way the student learns. And the traditional scholastic tradition in the Hindu tradition was always about inquiry. It was not about follow it because I tell you to. The spirit of inquiry was something that was always cultivated. The spirit of observing nature was something that was always cultivated, and that brought about scholarship. Today, if you look at all our education systems, a lot of emphasis is on memorizing, intellect, but there's another way to access knowledge, and that's through the intuitive ability. The senses give us one aspect of knowledge. I see the sun rising. The intellect gives me the second layer of knowledge. It says, hey, the sun is not rising, it's the earth that's moving. And often, today's scholarship stops at that level. But truly speaking, the third level, the intuitive level, which is what the Vedas talk about, which is what the yogic scriptures talk about, which is what the tradition talks about, is truly the scholastic ability. Today, developing this intuition, developing this intuitive ability is what I feel will make Hindu studies valuable. If we can have a differentiating factor, if we can say, hey, if you do this, everything else will be good. And like Dr. was saying, there's so much research happening on how all these chants actually make a difference to scholastic ability. There are schools which are meditating for a long time, we chant in Sanskrit. Sanskrit is essential. There's a school in London, I forget which one. And which shows a very, very deep connect between chanting Sanskrit and scholastic ability. The more linkages we can find like this, I believe will encourage people to take up Hindu studies. Not only Hindu studies needs to be mandate, a mandate never works, but inspiration always works. When we find value in something, that's when we can go ahead and want to do these things. In my experience in the last 23 years, where I have been teaching and spreading this wonderful experience of yoga, maybe I don't bring such a scholastic ability to the subject, but my understanding of the subject is that each one of us is responsible for the state of affairs today. We cannot sit back and say, well, let some people do it. if each one of us comes together, starts valuing these things and generates value. I always say, in such conferences, everyone shakes their head, yes, yes, yes. But now is the time to take action. Let's create more seats, let's create more avenues for scholarship. And at the Art of Living Foundation, that's where we set up a university, and we are looking at how we can give a fillip to these kind of topics. I'm sure many other organizations are also doing it, and it's so nice that with Swami Vidyanandaji, we're getting together all these efforts, and I'm sure we can make a very big difference to the efforts of everyone, whatever we're doing. So I'd like to end with a short story. I saw the people with the placards go away. Oh, yes. So there is, we have a Gurukul in the ashram in Bangalore, and there are these children who chant the Vedas, learn the Vedic techniques, the homas, the yajnas. And we came up with an intuition process, Gurudev Sri Sri Ravi Shankarji, and then we taught this, the way for the children to develop their intuition. And it's so amazing that just by the chanting and the intuition, these children are able to access another layer of knowledge. All our minds, all our intellect depends on the five senses for information. The electromagnetic radiation, the spectrum is vast, yet the visible spectrum is very small. The ears can only hear a minuscule part of the vibration, yet the mind has the ability to know much more. Today, when we look at this, whatever we are learning, whatever we are understanding is actually a minuscule part of everything. The meditation helped unlock that and allowed the minds to experience the reality. So one of the children said, tomorrow someone will ask Gurudev this question and he's going to answer this. The teacher who was teaching was surprised and said, oh well, children, you know children. But the next day the exact same thing happened. We have heard of these kind of abilities in days of yore, where Nadi Jyotish was written. People actually talked about what's going to happen in the future. All of this is well documented. But because we don't have experiential evidence, that's why all of this seems to be fantastic. It is termed as mythology. Today, we need to use all these techniques to get back, and 0 minutes is up. And so, thank you for listening to me so patiently.
Thank you so much, Dinesh Kashikar ji, for giving a very illuminating talk on how you have emphasized the need to mainstream the Hindu studies. And those who didn't know, I sure to know that some beginnings have been made, and let's wait for bigger drive, bigger initiative from elsewhere, so to make it mainstream. We'll wait for the day. Maybe after a year, if not after 4 years, we'll see how far you've been able to succeed at achieving this year. That will be a test for us. Okay, with these words, I request last but not the least, important speaker, Srimati Chandrika Tandon ji. We had the fortune to listen to her in the morning session. She has been a board member of the New York University, USA, and she is a very successful businesswoman and Grammy-nominated artist that we found when she sang also. She is the chairperson of Tandon Capital Associates at New York University, where she serves on several boards. She is a member of the board of directors of the Lincoln Center for Performing Arts, very rare combination. She has been trained by Guru in Hindustani, Carnatic and Western traditions. Her album Soul Call earned a Grammy nomination. She has received several awards for integrity and leadership, including the Gallatin Medal and the Walter Nicholas Medal. She is a distinguished alumni of both IIM Ahmedabad and Madras Christian College, Chennai. Well, Professor, please.
So I'm not a doctor. In fact, so I'm just Chandrika Tandon. Srimati is fine. I feel like a bull in a china shop, having heard these amazing scholars. How many of you in this group live outside India? Thank God. Because I was a little worried. I'm going to tell you, by the way, the thing I needed to add to my resume in the context of today's conversation is that, I've studied with these great gurus. I mean, Sri Ravi Shankar, I studied Transcendental Meditation with Michael and Peggy, and I see Swamiji there, Swami Dayananda Saraswati. So all of these for the last 20 years, these have all been very, very, very influential and important in my life in terms of thought. But why was I hand twisted by Nachiketa to be at this panel? I've had a front row seat to what a research university does. Not one research university, many research universities. In world-class research universities. And this has nothing to do with Hinduism. It is when and I'm talking at every echelon, as a faculty member, as a chair of the board, and as a board of trustees, and as a vice chairman of the board of trustees. And I chair many committees, the curriculum committees, the PNT committees. So I really think about long-term strategies. I've been doing this right now. I chair the engineering school board. I've been on the business school board for many years. I've been on the Wagner Public Service, and I'm on the medical school board. And medical schools, we're dealing with research. NYU declared the first tuition-free medical school. I'm on the board. And I'm involved with Yale and Harvard. I mean, we're involved in many, many schools. So this topic of how research is built is something I've thought about for about 20 years. The second reason this is all, so I'm going to give you different dots, and then let's try to connect it, because I'm beside myself into how to solve this issue, or I've got so many concerns and questions that I just wanted to put them all on the table, and please forgive me if I offend anyone or because I'm a very proud Hindu, so I'm coming from that point of view. Secondly, when our daughter graduated from Yale, we decided to do a major chair at Yale, multi-million-dollar chair, and I said I wanted it to be for Hinduism, contemporary Hinduism, I said. I won't even go to what a nightmare it was to set up that chair. We have a chair here on Hinduism. No, none of you would know about it, because it's one chair in one of the top universities after a lot of work that we set there. I'm quite involved with the Oxford Centre for Hindu Studies, which is in Oxford, England. And then I try to get involved with, I've done lots of little fundings for multiple institutions that are supporting schools, Vedic education, meditation in schools, multiple, the list is endless. But I care deeply about how do we bring our learning and our knowledge in a scholarly way into the mainstream. That's a question. And then the oddest situation I find myself is in dialogues with major other academic leaders. So I'd sit with the CEO or a president of a major Jewish university, who I won't name, or a major Christian university, and we'll have a fantastic conversation about all the different 3 hours we could just be talking about what I think the belief systems are and what his belief systems are. And he'd say, Chandrika, I want to go out now. Who's the next set of scholars I can go talk to? I'm like, let me think about that. Yeah, he says, well, do you have a local temple I can go talk to? Yeah, I'm thinking, what would he get if he goes to the temple? He's going to get the priest telling him more prayers. Great. Not that I chant the Vishnu Sahasranamam every day, but that doesn't help the president of the university. And then we have the situation where the issue that a lot of this, that's the fourth issue, which is my big frustration, then I'll come back to what I would like to speak about now, is we started this as part of the Queen's Temple, which I'm very involved in, because I thought we got to move away from rituals into actually much more into outreach and community service. But I'm sorry, I went to a Catholic convent school. I was a Hindu at home, but I studied, and they really show you the value of charity and bringing it into you in every step of the way. And not every kid can go and spend, when you go to the Ashvidya Gurukulam or you go to the Bangalore ashram or any of the other ashrams, it's magnificent. But my daughter or many of your children can't do that. And it was impossible for many of these kids to go take courses on Hinduism. I'd actually done an entire scan of courses on Hinduism. And then, you find something at the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies, Nick Sutton does a course. So it's a very complicated thing to find out what is going on, where it exists, and who the scholars are. I'm sure they all are. Then narratives sprout out. You have a Wendy Doniger story, you have a Diane X story, you have the CNN doing police, and then there's a whole outcry among the Hindus because there isn't an alternative narrative. And I don't want to go into what happened in history. I don't want to have this discussion 50 years from now. I won't be alive, but I don't want to have that because I'm not Rama. But 50 years, and by the way, yes, there's mythology and it's been downloaded, but it strains the credulousness. I can just tell you what happened. We went to a whole Gita, and these aren't kids. You assume that a lot of us professional women were sending their kids to Gita classes from day one. Many people didn't do that. And so part of it is how do you just not strain their credulousness to some degree. So there's different levels of issues one has to think about. And the other thing which we've learned with research in any subject, and this is not Hinduism, and Hinduism is like 100 times more complicated, is that when we decide we're going to become the lead in biomedical engineering, just to pick a topic, within a university, it's a 10, 15, 20-year process. There's an overall strategy. We don't know what's going to happen in biomedical engineering because many of the fields like biomimetics didn't exist, 20 years ago. But you start to selectively recruit, selectively invest. It's a whole strategic thought process where donors and faculty and department chairs and deans and everyone come together with industry to think in a very holistic way, and then you readjust the plan. So if I were to start and say, let me not look at what's wrong, let me not look at what the problems are, there are many. Let us start to think about what could we do. First we have to say, what's our goal? Are we trying to create a curriculum? Are we trying to create basically a curriculum for all Indian children or Hindu children from cradle to grave? That's one goal. Are we trying to become and have some major scholarly work with accreditation in major universities? And when I say major universities, they have to be in the top 20 in the US News and World top 20. You can't say, oh, I've got this in some random place, oh, that's newly being set up. We won't get taken seriously. And then the problem there is you have to create the critical mass. We found that setting up one chair in a university means nothing. It means nothing. Do you know how a structure of a university, like, I'm not going to mention names, but in a university, you have a divinity department, you have a theology department, which may or may not be related to divinity, you have a philosophy department, you have an Indian studies department in some cases, you have an Asian studies department. Yeah, and by the way, all of these are run by department chairs. So where does the India or Hindu studies fit? Oh, in the international area. But international is this little orphan child. So, these look like trivial issues. And then there's one little floating chair, which, by the way, was several $1 million. Yale and so on don't do a chair for $1,000. When you talk of university chairs, you're already in the major leagues. But then you can't find the scholars because the pipeline of scholars don't exist. One of the consistent feedbacks I have had from several top university professors is that we cannot staff this chair. And we cannot staff, don't give us any more money because we cannot staff the chairs. And by the way, there isn't a group of scholars because right now, if you ask me, I'm using biomedical, but it could be any other field. We could pretty much tell you, we almost have a list which tells you who are the big, like Nobel laureates or about to get the Abel Prize or about to get something. Then we've got the next list and the next list. We have a very holistic view in a very small subject. So then I think to myself, why can't we do this with Hinduism? Okay, we can't, this is to start with, it's a 6,000-year-old religion, or way of life, or something. It's a whole way. And there is no single point of view. There isn't, I asked somebody, so give me 10, not the equivalent of the 10 commandments, give me 10 principles. And then I did an interview. I took a 1-year interview. I interviewed probably 100 people. I got so many commandments. By the time I was finished, I said, I don't even know who I am anymore. I said, I am everything. I am all. Aham Brahmasmi. And I went back to that. And then try, this is me on a spiritual quest with a lot of time and resources. And try telling this to a young kid who's just getting started. So, point number one, so if I were just, and I don't know how many minutes I have, but my theme number one would be, we need to create a master research strategy. And this can't be done, we're doing this, we put a chair in. Some group of people, we need to have a strategic view, which says, okay, let's pick 3 universities. Let's pick 3 themes. And let us really start to invest in that. And let's bring everybody together, the people that are active there, the donors, the departments, the scholars, doing things just in India isn't going to get you in the global world for accreditation for Hindu studies. Or if you're doing it in Gurukuls, it's phenomenal that you have a start, but it isn't going to get you into like the school of academic thought. So to have a holistic research plan, and part of that holistic research plan is, when you go into the current research on Hindu studies that exists, and I have a list of all the scholars right now to some degree and what they do, there's arcane little topics being studied. Important, which is great for academic qualifications, sort of the thought process of Draupadi when her sari was being removed. Okay, it's an important topic, but it's not going to advance the cause of us coming together to eventually create a body of knowledge. So I would say theme number one, to bring an integrated research plan where people think together, put their egos aside, and really think it through. It's an imperative. Without doing that, none of this we're talking about, we can beat the chest, the floor, and talk about this, ain't gonna happen. I can just tell you that, The second thing I would say is, we have to create, using technology, India is the home of technology. And I wish we could have a common curriculum, not a one guru's curriculum or a second guru's curriculum, but a common curriculum, which would basically give us a cradle-to-grave view of just something. It's a very easy investment, and we don't have to, it's like peeling the onion. We can't solve every piece first, but can't we peel a couple of different layers of that? So that would be, and I think the issue is not just, we keep talking of Hinduism for Hindus, but it's Hinduism for the world. And I think that's the second thing, and we can talk about this, really introducing a whole, I'd love to see a common intro to Hinduism course. We need an accreditation body. I don't know if you guys are all familiar with Middle States. Middle States, every university in America has to be accredited by Middle States. A group of them walk in every few years and look and see if that university, even Harvard, even NYU, whether they're doing their job. We don't know. Somebody comes up with this, like the IIMs. Every time you turn, there's a new IIM coming in. How good are they? We don't know. Maybe they're all wonderful. But then you need an accreditation process and a body. And we don't have that for Hinduism. So that's the third thing. You need to create that. And then, I think finally we've just got to take all this fragmentation out. But I think finally we have to own, and this gets into some points that were already made. We have to find a way to own the stuff that's already taken hold. Meditation's big, yoga's big, but it's got nothing to do with Hinduism in the way it's spoken about. Who goes into a class and which Hindu class talks about yoga? You hear about yoga from Jiva Mukti, a beautiful guy who's teaching you amazing techniques, or meditation, and bits and bobs of it are starting to come together. But the spiritual path seems to be very different from the Hindu path, which seems to not come together. So my thought is, how do we take 3 or 4 of the big modern debates and like cosmic consciousness, like quantum consciousness, like yoga, like meditation, and really kind of connect it into a Hindu stem, bringing all the scholars together. That is my thought. I want us to move forward, not look back.
Chandrika ji for giving a very, very fascinating look at this problem. Now I think kind of distinguished panel we have, it is established that this subject has a tremendous appeal, tremendous academic value. The point is how do we go about it? The next step is how it should come on the academic agenda of the universities. So that has to be sorted out. And there will be problems, there will be challenges, but I think expertise growing at every academic center outside that we should have done ready to implement it. Let's see. Now the topic is open to the audience for question. See, there's something. The time is short. Question should be very clear. No reflection, pointed question. And also take who to answer.
If you don't allow me, I can moderate so that I can. Thank you. I see the first question here.
It's not a question, it's an observation that I want to understand. I work for the World Bank and I've gone back to Bangalore to build a school. And for the past 18 years, we've had the school and have been developing a curriculum. And what you said is absolutely right. It does not belong to any particular religion. This is worldwide, it's universal knowledge that our ancestors have handed over it to us on a platter. We do not know how to take it. And I have not been given a chance. Give me 2 minutes and I can make a presentation on the books that we have developed. And this is what I have to say. And Nachiketa, I tried my very best to make a presentation on the books, but I have not been able to do that. And because this is a very important forum and we are missing an opportunity when we don't have that. Thank you.
Okay, I don't know who, there are so many hands, so I'll start here. 1, 2, 3.
Namaste, my question to Chandrika madam. Madam, just you talked about the universities and chair and funding them to bring all of that together. But ma'am, what is the way? Basically, yes, this is the idea, you give a great title. What is the way how we can emerge all the different methodologies, different ways together to bring the glorious and that there's fantastic benefits of the Hindu or basically Sanatana Dharma or maybe Indian ideology to the world. So how we can bring together, I mean, because many chairs are doing and all. So what is the pathway, what is the methodology?
It's a very long answer, but the core idea has to be, as I said, we have to peel the onion. You cannot take the whole pot and then look at it and lament the pot. And that's a little bit of what we're doing. We can't do that. I'd rather take one topic. Okay, if it's meditation, let us bring the best of all the thinking and the research that's been done. We have the scholars, Swami began on this, collected this amazing group of people, and between all of these learned sages, we can collect so many people. But to agree on something that we can then go and put in place as a curriculum with the Western thought. It can't just be us sitting and thinking in India. It's got to meet the standards of Western academic university standards, and they are very, very different. Peer-reviewed journals is a very different story. But I don't have I have an answer, but not for now.
Does the panel not think that education and study education, you have committed two important sectors? That is that every child should know, every citizen should know what to do in an emergency, what to do if there is fire, there is poison, if there is invasion by another country. That is education. The second thing is, the whole history of India has been by people coming and invading us and taking advantage of us, and we have developed a Hare Bakari mentality. We should have Kshatriya studies chair in every university. We should have a chair of citizen support paramilitary services, and every citizen should spend 6 weeks studying those things so that India can elevate itself by itself. Thank you.
Thank you. I understood this session to talk about the role of institutions in developing scholars in Hindu studies. And I'm sorry, you have wavered all around the baseline. The way I understand that, and I have a background in education and curriculum development, is for the institutions to get together and say, hey guys, we're going to prepare a core curriculum for Hindu studies. Until and unless you do that, you're not going to go anywhere. First, you come up with a core curriculum and come up with an audience. There is something called the Anubandha Chatushtaya. You should define the Adhikari, Vishya, Sambandha and Prayojana. They have taught you everything. Go back to them and revisit them. And later on, you find out who the Adhikaris are going to be, and the program evaluation, and pre and post testing of it. Until all that happens, good luck. And keep your money, man.
These are good comments. I think he makes an excellent point.
Yeah, my question is to Ms. Chandrika ji. When you're talking about content development, my question is, can we challenge certain theories like Darwin's theory, Aryan invasion theory? There is so much material already there in Indian text as well as in Western text, which is not being even accepted by new scholars in the Western as well as Indian. So there is a theory about poor countries producing more people, and I've learned this thing from my mother who had done MA in history and some political science. I don't understand and I don't agree with any of the theories which she has studied in that so-called first generation British style curriculum, which is actually, even being her daughter, it's not acceptable to me. So my question is, how do we change the content which is already there in the textbook right now in India and otherwise, and how to change it? Like, my question is...
I'm going to really go back to the point that the gentleman before made about institutions. I think this is the central issue, and by the way, I don't think we were all I know we didn't completely spend a lot of time talking about what institutions should do, but there's a supply and demand. You can't go to a university, and I'm not taking a university perspective, you can't go to a university who doesn't care really about Hinduism. They've got $150 million from the Qatari government to do Islamic studies, or they've got $200 million to do something else. They're not that interested. So this stuff about people getting together is not going to come from them. We have to come together. So that's exactly, I'm very much in sync with you. I learned it the hard way, but you're exactly right. And I think gets back to the question that you were raising. If we take specific topics and we are able to bring people together, the right institutions or the individuals and the scholars and the sages, people who have learned it, let us, in my consulting work, we call this directionally correct. You cannot be 100% correct. In our case, but everything has got a, you can't have a curriculum which is all about differences. It's got to be some common ground. But if we can find some common ground and say, this is important, okay, this also is important, but we can't get to it right now. If that could happen, then we can, as a one voice, go into the textbooks. But right now, we are single voices. This is like, the story of Aesop's fables, We're not united with a theme and an idea. So the sticks are complicated. They're flying in the wind. I'm sorry, I'm going to take a privilege and just ask this guys here, because they've had their hands up from like the moment one. They're third in line? Okay, as long as you get them.
My question is to Dr. Bush and Chandrika ji. I am a neurologist and I agree with a lot of what you said about the neuroscience of meditation, tantra and all that. However, my worry is that when we start saying that only when these things are mined through a scientific lens, when they are published in Nature and Science, are they considered respectable and valid, we sacrifice a lot of that primacy that our own traditions have. When we think back to people like J.C. Bose or C.V. Raman, they were great, but what good were they to Hindus? What good was C.V. Raman and J.C. Bose to India as a nation? Producing more of those is going to benefit humanity, yes, it is going to benefit a scientific project, but I think until we have our own ideological and kind of intellectual tradition which is independent of the Western originated UK, Germany derived scientific enterprise of today, there will be no value in letting our best minds synthesize our traditions into the Western scientific river.
Michael, you want to say something? I'll go from the back.
Go ahead.
I don't think it's either or. Because what Michael was talking about and what you're talking about is this extraordinary credibility that this gives us in a certain set of circles. And this gets to the key point that I feel, and this is about yoga, about meditation, about everything else. What happens if we can now take that and weave 50 incredible stories that aren't phantasmagorical, but real stories that people can believe and make it into a complete compendium, and that becomes part of this curriculum idea. So that we claim, and I think this is a central issue. So we have nothing to do when yoga happened in America. And I was part of that movement, because I've lived here for 40 years in New York City, where it sort of started probably in California, but New York is big. It was not, people just took everything out of it, the namaste, the this, the that, and now it's slowly coming back. But so I think bringing that in is a big deal. But that is what the thought process. It cannot be random. It needs the thought process. Michael's answer. Michael's answer.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I can't be fair to everybody. I'm not recognizing what I'm
Pranam to everybody. I enjoyed the session. The question I have is, myself is a endowed chair professor. My university president is a Vandala Puri. She is from Madras. But we still will lack a curriculum on introduction to Hinduism. All these speakers, they talked about it. Can you come up with a one chapter and then we can move on to create this one and push it at the universities?
I would like to answer this question. Towards the end of my presentation, I said we have met 3 times different global spiritual organizations. Chinmaya Mission, Ramakrishna Mission, Art of Living, RSS, VHP, Gayatri Parivar. We had a couple of meetings and we have asked for, that answers some of your questions too, sir, that we are making a list of people who are already scholars in these organizations. We have never done that earlier. Now we are listing them. See, a person comes to study Gita. We teach Gita, but we don't go into this kind of an academic challenge which we have faced earlier. So now we are listing down the people who are all scholars. They would go through our orientation, and one of the things which we had in mind, which we want to do, is create that curriculum. That's why towards the end I said, we are organizing this, different scholars from various organizations coming together. We are going to have our next meeting in January. So we have listed down different academic challenges. Now we are taking the help of the people who have gone through that to see what solutions can come. In that plan, we do definitely have a plan to do a kind of a curriculum. When I say scholars of these 10 organizations which we took up, I'm telling you this number would be somewhere around 40-50,000 scholars.
We need a solution in 1 year so that we can push for the courses.
I would definitely like to meet you when I come down, because next time when we have, I want you inside. So we do it within a year's time. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, 1 minute was my time. Finally. No, I mean, I want to say one thing. If you want to understand engineering, if you want to understand science, if you understand all this, you have to do maths. This is the basic thing that you have to do. If you want to understand Hinduism, your maths is Sanskrit. So the first thing you have to do is to learn good Sanskrit. First thing, we have to develop a curriculum. That curriculum already exists. Even the scholars, these scholars do exist, but they've been completely neglected. And I mean, they are the traditional pandits, who know the Sanskrit very well, who have a very critical mind, and they are completely neglected in modern India because many of them they cannot speak English. Now I say one thing, what is this curriculum? This has been done in India. If you want to understand Hinduism, learn good Sanskrit, read those books in Sanskrit, not through English translations. Or in your mother tongue. Or in your mother tongue. I agree with you, completely. If it is Tamil or whatever if it is an original word. But I say, read also, the core curriculum is formed by the Shat Darshan, Mimamsa, which is most important to understand Indian thought. The three basic is Mimamsa, Nyaya, and Vyakara. Start for that. Do your homework, because people are not doing their homework. They are speaking of yoga, they are speaking of meditation, but they never go to the classical text where everything began and everything was done in a thorough manner.
Basic sciences first.
You are completely right. And just to finish, I mean, this will be also a little bit my topic tomorrow. No? You went to the States to learn science. I myself, I went from the West to Banaras to learn Sanskrit and to try to understand, as much as I can in my humble way, a little bit of Hinduism. Okay, you have to know, my teacher used to say, you have to know the Shat Darshanas. Now, you cannot read all the books of Mimamsa, you cannot read all the books of Nyaya, you cannot read all the book of Vedanta, Sankhya, Yoga. But the Hindu tradition got a solution already for that. Because you don't have to read the Brahma Sutras. There is a kind of text in the Sanskrit tradition which are called prakaranas. Prakaranas are small books, that give you an introduction to each system, so that you cannot go, and you don't have to go through all these innumerable texts. No? You read those prakaranas as simple texts. This is very important. I think you should really support your Indian pandits. They are dying of hunger. They are completely neglected. In Banaras, when I was in Banaras in '86, I spent 16 years there, and I remember when my teacher said, there are only 2 people who can read certain texts of Mimamsa. And Mimamsa is very important to understand Shastra. You read Shastra. And he said, there are only 2 people, one in Banaras, one in South India. These people are dead. The quality of scholarship in traditional and Pandit is going down, because these people feel neglected and feel that modern India is not looking at them. Very good, sir.
My comment and question is addressed to you, and I'm really happy with your passion. And I'd like to support this idea that you have already noticed that the capacity to do research in Hinduism is not in the West, so the investment has to be in India with the people there. So we're generating indigenous scholarship. The other point I want to make is that much very stringent research on Hinduism already exists in the West, but due to Hinduphobia, it's divided into different other headings such as consciousness studies or all kinds of other contemplative studies, but they're all doing research on Hinduism. But so they have claimed their chairs under different names instead of Hinduism. So we can then, I don't know how to do it, but that is a claim we can make. That all that research that's under contemplative studies and all those other neuroscience studies are all on Hindu and all the studies on the research. So how do we claim that? My question to you is, due to Hinduphobia, all the research that has been done on Hinduism is scattered in others, and the rest of it is under India studies or something. I mean, we don't even have studies on Hinduism. How do we start that collection and claiming that this research is on Hinduism and it's not in contemplative studies and all? I mean, this is appropriation, this is digestion of our knowledge into other people's who are trademarking all this knowledge and making money off it in different shares. So claiming that, how do we do that?
I'll just say one thing. The place I would start is not around the appropriation. I would get there, but I would start with positive things we do, whether it's really building the institutions in India, here, some major scales of research, and then almost by example, then you start to appropriate. Because if we start the appropriation, that wouldn't be the first step, but I think it's a very critical point you're making.
Okay, thank you very much. This is, we are ending the session. It was very exciting. If you have more questions, you can talk to our esteemed panelists and talk offline and get your questions answered or your comments communicated to them.